Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And welcome to the travel debate. This is the 18th debate, and every year it keeps getting bigger and better and more work. So thank you to Christine and Kate who helped organize today's event. This is my sixth travel debate as dean, and I'm always impressed by the quality of the debate about such important topics in medicine. And without fail, the dialogue is clever, articulate, and often with a splash of humor. So to begin with, I'd like to invite our Dean Emeritus, David Walker, to come up to the podium and tell us a little bit about Dr. Travill, the history of the debate, and how it came to be named in his honor.
Thank you, Richard. Welcome to the Travill family. I think there are more of you this time than ever before. So Tony Travill, before I start, how many people in the audience remember Tony Travill? There are more each year. I do. I was a student of Tony Travill's many years ago. I'll tell you just a few things about him. He came to Canada in 1957 after serving as aircrew in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War when he was a tail gunner, and used to regale us students with the facts that on each sortie he was more likely to die than to return, and made some analogy to our membership in the class of Med 71. He went on from surviving the war to reading medicine at the London Hospital Medical School. He, as I said, he came to Canada and did a residency year in Montreal, and then became a family doctor in Orillia, before coming back to Queen's to study anatomy under Dr. John Basmajian. Following that, he went to Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, to study for 2 years before returning to Queen's in the Department of Anatomy in 1964. He subsequently became professor and head from 1969 to 1978, during a time when headships were given almost for life. He was a fascinating character, a strict parliamentarian, and a noted faculty historian. Medicine at Queen's, 1854 to 1920, and just a few Queen's medical profiles in 1991. He had a passion for debate on current social, political, and educational issues, and for many years he delivered a rigorous and challenging lecture to incoming first-year medical students during orientation week. He had a habit, when with the class or with you individually, of taking the counterpoint on just about any issue that you could think of, just to evoke debate. In his histology classes, he would terrorize our class by showing a slide, asking us, "What is this?" and then, "Do you have one?" The "what is this" was always a dangerous question, but "do you have one" had the ability to humiliate all of us. In any event, that was Tony Travill. He would love these debates, and I look forward to hearing this one. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I do see a few seats here. There's 4 seats up here. If anybody is looking for a seat, just take a second and get everybody situated. Great. So thank you, David. Thanks so much. And as David mentioned, we have 6 members of the Travill family here tonight. Welcome Steve and his son Matthew, Andrew and Louise, and Patrick and Pam. So welcome to Queen's, and we're thrilled to have you here. It makes it extra special that the family is here to enjoy the debate. All the way back to, I think, 1997, the Travill family has been coming every year to celebrate with us. So before I introduce the speakers, maybe I could all ask you in a round of applause for Chris Frank, who's done so much hard work in getting the Travill debate organized. Where's Chris? Somewhere. Thank you. And Joining Chris were his co-committee members, David Taylor, Chris Smith, Stephen Archer, John Redan, Dan Howes, and former student debaters, Sarah Taysir Ben Sharif, Dr. Eve Purdy, Fay Q, Sophie Palmer, Thomas Cran, and Jennifer Fu. So thank you all for helping Chris and getting the debate all set up. Today's debaters will join next year's committee, and we're always looking for interesting topics and future debaters, so please fire off an email to Chris if you have some good ideas. Dudley Field Malone, a famous U.S. attorney, once said, "I've never in my life learned anything from any person who agreed with me." So in that spirit, we hope today everyone learns and gains wisdom from tonight's debate. Many things in medicine and certainly the way we teach and train are not clear. And so we really have the responsibility of looking at both sides of any issue and a dilemma. And while our debaters are always eager to engage with passion, please realize that their positions are not necessarily adopted by things they actually believe in. In fact, the plaque for tonight's debate is already engraved with the names of both teams. So we really don't believe, as Jackie Duffin taught us, in the fact that there's winners or losers, but it's really, as David Walker said, as Tony Travill would have said, the honor is in the debate itself. But we will ask you nonetheless to vote on just how far along the needle you move from your current position on this issue. So think about where you currently stand and whether you've been persuaded to move just a little bit further, we'll call it to the left or to the right, depending on what side of the debate you're thinking about. So we'll ask for a show of hands after the debate happens, and we'll get a sense of how far you've moved. And now to meet our debaters. They will argue on the proposition that, be it resolved, the rotating internship should be reinstated. So arguing on the A side, we have Dr. Michele Gibson, and a special thank you to Michele, who has been not of strong voice today, and with dedication she's come and shown up tonight, so thank you, Michele. Michele is an assistant professor in the Division of Geriatrics in Medicine. She completed her family medicine and care of the elderly training here at Queen's, as well as her master's degree in education. She directs our first year of the medical school program and is also the director of student assessment for our undergraduate program. She's a passionate and renowned teacher and was recently awarded the Queen's Alumni Award for Excellence in Teaching. So Michele, thank you. Michelle is joined on her team by Julia Milton, who's a first-year medical student in the class of 2020. That's right. There we go. All right. Originally from Victoria, BC, she attended Queen's as an undergraduate student in economics and has been a member of the Queen's Debating Union. So I'm sure you'll put your debating skills. Yeah, Michelle got a ringer for tonight. Yeah, yes. And I didn't hear what he said. Rigged. Was that an official objection? And the objection and the rigged debate, it looks like he's wearing a Donald Trump wig, is coming from Dr. David Holland, who is on the nay side. And David is the chair of the Division of Nephrology in the Department of Medicine, a well-respected teacher, having been recognized by our Escalapian Society with a teaching award, an impressive 5 times. David serves as medical director for our kidney transplantation program at Kingston General and operates a large clinical practice that includes general nephrology care, management of chronic kidney disease, provision of peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis, and as mentioned, kidney transplantation. And David's joined by an aspiring nephrologist. No, I'm just kidding. You got to do a rotating internship first. By his partner Max Boulay, and Max is in the Queen's class of 2019. There we go. No taking sides now, right? We'll see how many 2020s we have versus 2019s. Yeah. Born in Edmonton and raised in Yellowknife, and having grown up in Oregon, Max now calls Southern Alberta his home. So Max is an avid, can't figure that one out, but an avid traveler and writer. He studied biology at Acadia University before coming to Queen's. So Marnie Jacobs, where's miserable Marnie? I think they call her, right? Yeah. No, well, no, that's true. Yeah. No, but tonight she has to be miserable, right? Because she's the holder of the gavel, and she's going to make sure we all adhere to our strict rules. So Marnie, thank you for being the bad cop. And the rules, because the rules of the debate are indeed strict. So the yay side will open with 10 minutes. The nay side will follow with 10 minutes. And then the process is repeated once, yay and nay each together, another 10 minutes each. And at the end, they'll have 2 minutes to sum up. We'll keep a tight clock, thanks to Marnie. And when the time is up, our timekeeper will loudly bang on the travel debate gavel to drown out any unruly debaters. If they refuse to stop debating, someone, I think, will be charged with a hook to get them off the podium. Just a quick word about the travel debate gavel. It was actually made specifically for this debate by Chaim Berman, who was the grandfather of Dr. Herschel Berman from the Queen's medical class of 1998. And it's really been used every time since its inception. So before the debate begins, let's just get a sense how many of you have arrived here tonight with a firm view that the rotating internship should be reinstated. Well, we won't count, but we see a number of hands. And how many think the opposite, that it shouldn't be reinstated? Well, I think this is a wonderful place to start. We're about 50-50. You notice that all the old guys here in the front wanted it reinstated. No, I'm just teasing. That's right, yeah. Okay, so we know where we're starting from, and remember, you're going to be voting at the end about how much you were persuaded by to move your view. So let me first invite Michele Gibson to come and speak for the A side.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. They were not kidding when they said I am of low voice. I spent the day at home not talking to my husband, and oddly, that didn't bother him. However, it does give me about 10 minutes of voice before I have to sign off for you today. Welcome to the travel debate. My partner and I thought we would start by actually defining the rotating internship, since our very careful polling let us know that many of our junior members of our profession don't actually know what we're talking about. So we thought it would be fair to introduce that. So what was the rotating internship? It was where trainees after medical school would rotate through different disciplines in a hospital for a year. There were different types. There were surgical internships and other medical internships and varieties. It was an option instead of going to residency, but people could still go from medical school to residency. It would lead to a license if people wanted after 1 year and passing an exam, and then would allow them to go into what used to be called general practice. And it was phased out starting in approximately 1988 from our research, starting in Quebec and then going across the country. Largely for many different reasons, but one of the main concerns was that there was a great increasing concern that 1 year of training did not prepare people properly for general practice in the community. And it led to more formal changes to the College of Family Physicians and the Royal College. So having defined what this is, and so that the people that are in first and second year med school can quietly go, oh, now I know what we're talking about. Here I'm going to present our proposal. Our proposal is that we are not just saying that we should be reinstating the rotating internship, but it needs to have a comeback, a proper comeback. We're talking a spectacular comeback. We're talking an Elvis Presley comeback. So many of you are probably not familiar with what happened in 1968. This was very critical. Prior to 1968, in the 1960s, Elvis was having a very, very bad time in his career. There were really, really bad movies. Fun in Acapulco. It wasn't going well. He wasn't keeping up with the times. He had no best-selling records. No one would pay him $1 million to be in a movie anymore. Go figure. His career was going on the down and out, and it looked like he was never going to recover. So he had some very wise people advise him, and he listened to them, and that's a key point. And he came back with this special in December of 1968, where they got rid of all the stuff that wasn't working with Elvis. So Elvis they moved him away from those bad movies. They went back to what worked with Elvis, how he sang, how he looked, bring out the leather. He did this fantastic special that essentially launched his career again because he was able to adapt to the times, learn from what had happened over the past number of years, and it's got a number of years more in his career. We'll come back to what happened at the end. I haven't forgotten that. So what we would like to do is give the rotating internship that kind of comeback. We're not talking about just plucking what didn't work in 1998 and dropping it smack down into the middle of 2016. Sorry, I know that we're beyond 1916. We would keep what was working about it. So we would keep the fact that it would be optional for people who wanted to explore that part of medicine and to make some more informed decisions, and I'll expand on that a little bit. It would still allow trainees the choice of doing that versus going to residency. We would like them at the end of the rotating internship to choose to go into residency if that is what they wish. But we need to learn from what we have done in the vast many years since we got rid of the internship. First of all, we understand a lot more about education. We have lots of people that have been very clever and learned a lot about how our trainees learn and how we should assess them and how we should support them. There are many different jargon terms I can throw in here, but they all come out in what we now talk about as competency-based medical education. We now have a much better understanding of what we're trying to develop in terms of looking for, and we are in fact leading the way in that at Queen's University, as Dr. Resnick will be speaking about in a couple of weeks. So we want to bring those principles back to the rotating internship. As a profession, we think we can do this. We should be able to define what are the competencies we think should come out of a rotating internship. What would allow them, and again, there would be variety as there was before, that would allow this portability to people to finish the rotating internship and move into, for example, residency programs. Without, and this is a key point, lengthening the training program. We know this is a concern and will likely be mentioned in other parts of the debate. So we're not looking for that. We're not looking to lengthen the training program. We're looking to keep what was working in the actual internship program. So what other things worked about the rotating internship? And excuse me while I go and drink my magic ginger cocktail, which will give me another 2 minutes. Just ginger. We wanted to look at, to pick up where I was before, we wanted to take what was working about it and build on that. So we would work with all the different stakeholders. So we would work with the College of Family Physicians, Royal College, and Medical Council of Canada to see how we could build these internships to allow flexibility, which my colleague will be speaking a lot more about, and how this will help our learners of today arrive at wise decisions about where they want to spend their careers. We would link these to competencies that are required in our current healthcare system in Canada. So what we would propose is that this rotating internship would not lead to the old general license. That would be bringing back bad Elvis. Think Fun in Acapulco. We want to bring back the good Elvis, and we want to say, are there areas in our healthcare field where we need more physician power in a specific scope of practice? So for example, are there certain places where we could use people in a hospitalist role with a very fixed scope of practice with carefully defined competencies coming out of the internship year? Are there areas in our vast rural areas in Canada that could use people after 1 year of training with a very fixed focus of practice? This is not, absolutely not equivalent to family medicine. I am from family medicine. I'm very passionate about this, but it would be something that would allow people to explore that area for a bit. And then possibly enter residency later once they've explored a few other areas. So we would want to increase the flexibility for trainees. We want to look at the benefits of basically what is a built-in spiral curriculum. If you've experienced obstetrics once in clerkship, that may be great. But if you come back at it after another year of training, once you've done all kinds of other rotations, you're going to get more out of it. I speak to this as somebody who did this sort of thing in family medicine. Eventually we came back. So that is spiral curriculum, coming back to the same concept with more knowledge and learning. And better understanding and appreciation of generalism, which we think is very important. There are many long documents written about generalism, including from some very fine folks at Queen's. I picked one quote to summarize what journalism is, and I will drink ginger before I read it to you. Journalism is a perspective on the whole rather than the parts, on relationships and processes rather than components and facts, and on judicious, context-specific decisions on how and at what level to consider a problem. Exposing trainees to more areas of medicine will help to foster this concept of journalism as a process and a way of thinking. Journalism is not about knowing a little bit about many different things. It has a lot more depth than that. And the Royal College, in addition to the College of Family Physicians, has put forth papers encouraging journalism in all fields, including specialist fields. They've even coined the term journalist specialists in the Royal College because they appreciate the importance of this. So what we want to do is to leverage what was working from the internship year, that journalism, that appreciation of other disciplines, that learning how and where you work within the healthcare field, and allowing our trainees a bit more time to explore that in depth. Clerkship is great. There are clerks in the audience, but you're often experiencing things for the first time. When you come back to them, you come back to it with a greater depth and a greater appreciation for what's going on. And that's what you can get from a rotating internship. Will this be easy? Clearly not. It's clearly not going to be easy. But we have faith as a profession. That's the advantage of being on our side, that we can do this. We know that we have energy. If I can get up here and talk to you today with this kind of a voice, we can certainly, as a group, look at how we can implement these changes to facilitate, like I said, benefits for our trainees, but also for the profession as a whole. So this is where I bring up the fact that you're all secretly going, okay, this Elvis comeback thing has a fairly fatal flaw. Elvis died. I'm well aware of that. I mentioned that to Dr. Frank. He said everybody dies. I know that too. However, what has evolved since when Elvis died is we have also developed other strategies such as program evaluation, quality assurance and monitoring. We will monitor this comeback so that it doesn't end up the same way that Elvis did. I have a few seconds left, but I think for your sake and for mine, I'm going to leave it at that. We need to bring back a fantastic comeback, an Elvis-like comeback with program evaluation for the rotating internship year.
You might have heard from Bleeding Heart Liberals that I'm not good at debates. Wrong. That is a rumor spread by the left-wing news media, which is rigged. And speaking of rumor, let me say this. There is nothing wrong with my hands. These are not small hands. And if the hands are good, then so is everything else. I'm good at debates. I just don't like them because I'm always right. I accept the results of this debate if I win. If I lose, then it is rigged. I tried to get Max to dress up as Hillary. But apparently after 5 p.m. there's a rule that you can't wear a pantsuit. As doctors, we seek the right diagnosis with the assurance that a correct treatment will follow. But if we get a diagnosis wrong, then the treatment will also be wrong. Our opponents offer the rotating internship as an antidote to 2 problems. First, a lack of time, and by inference, inadequate clinical exposure, making the choice of a career path difficult and stressful for medical students. And second, students need a more generalist education. Let me begin with the first of these, inadequate time and exposure. When I did my rotating internship, I worked with a vascular surgeon. One day while doing a cabbage, the surgeon handed me a scalpel and told me to harvest the vein while he worked up top. I recall his humble words, "There is no damage that you can do which I cannot fix." Truer words have never been spoken until that day. I did not need a rotating internship to know that someone such as myself, incapable of tying shoelaces, should not be a surgeon. I would suggest that more time simply promotes procrastination. My youngest son did a rotating internship after high school. He called it a victory lap. He rotated through various specialties, including the Kingston Brewing Company, Sir John's Public House, Copper Penny, Fluid, Lone Star, The Merchant, The Spot Nightclub, Stages, Jack Astor's, the Iron Duke of Wellington. Blue Martini, the Toucan in Fitzpatrick's, Royal Tavern, the Queen's Inn, Tirnanog, the Spot Nightclub. I said that twice. He really enjoyed it. The Ale House, Grizzly Grill, and the Plaza Hotel. His rotations have brought him neither insight nor clarity. It might be argued that the rotating internship provides more exposure, helping students select a career. It's getting late. You hungry? I'm feeling a bit peckish myself. Let's order some food. The dean is paying. I don't pay for anything. That's because I'm smart. We're ordering Chinese. We're not having Taco Bell. I'm building a wall. We have two choices. Silver Walk, dinner for two, egg roll $3, rice $6, beef with black bean sauce $11, sweet and sour shrimp $12, total $32. Choice number two, the Mandarin Buffet, with over 100 items, dinner for two, $64. I don't know if you have ever eaten at the Mandarin, but don't. It's a huge buffet, over 100 items, a basket, as my opponent would say, a basket of deplorables. But do not confuse choice with gluttony. You might say to the staff at the Mandarin, I don't want all these items. I only want 3 or 4. And the staff would reply, too bad. It's a buffet, a fixed menu, a fixed curriculum, take it or leave it. They might say, who do you think you are, Benjamin Bloom? I'll come back to that later. I want you to listen to this Wikipedia definition of speed dating. Men and women are rotated over a series of short dates. At the end of each interval, the organizer rings a bell, clinks a glass, or blows a whistle to signal the participants to move on to the next date. And at the end, participants submit to the organizers a list of who they would like to provide their contact information to. If there is a match, contact information is forwarded to both parties. Are we talking about speed dating or the rotating internship? It's hard to tell the difference. And while on the topic of speed dating, remember the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. He discusses the process of decision making. Based on the responses provided by speed dating participants, researchers concluded that what participants say they wanted in an ideal mate, does not actually match their subconscious preferences. We cannot help but recall the familiar words of Confucius. Be careful what you want, you may get it. Or as Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you are going, you will get there. I suggest to you that the rotating internship is medicine's version of speed dating, a very expensive victory lap, a veritable buffet overflowing with choice and a generous helping of sweet and sour sauce. Despite my opposition, I still can appreciate the nostalgia. Marshall McLuhan was a professor of literature at Trinity College during the 60s. He said strange things like, the medium is the message, and was the first to coin the phrase global village, decades before the internet. He predicted that when people are bombarded with too much information, they lose their sense of identity and gravitate toward the familiar. People embrace nostalgia. I, for one, am counting on it to win the US election. McLuhan said, we live by the revival. It tells us who we are or were. Reinstating the rotating internship is not a cure, but a symptom whose roots lie in the information overload that confronts our students and promotes a longing for that which is familiar. If you give in to this primitive tribal instinct, I will be the next president of the United States. I confess generalism holds a certain romantic and irresistible appeal. My father was a family doctor. In addition to general practice, he performed surgery, delivered babies, administered anesthesia. He even rolled his own pills. He was a Renaissance man, but the idea of following in his footsteps is neither practical nor wise. I cannot help but recall the words of Michele Gibson, who wrote about children. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. There are literally thousands of papers published daily and thousands of clinical guidelines. The rotating internship cannot possibly provide a generalist knowledge when facing this tsunami of information. Some might argue that society needs a generalist curriculum to address the shortage of primary care providers. To this, I would first say that I consider family medicine a specialty, not a default plan. To this, I would also suggest that interest and opportunity in primary care still exists. The documents entitled The Future of Medical Education in Canada, published by the Royal College in 2001, and other documents show that the interest in family medicine has actually increased. Children play tic-tac-toe, but only children, not adults. Not because the game is too simple, just the opposite. The game ends in stalemate. It is unwinnable. Residency and the CARMS match that precedes it is a game of tic-tac-toe. Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Ignoring a game which is rigged while reinstating the rotating internship is Einstein's definition of insanity. What's the answer? Benjamin Bloom. Thank you.
Everyone. There's a few things I'd like to do to start out this speech. Firstly, I'd like to do a little bit of refutation to talk about some of the critiques we think will happen to the rotating internship and a little bit of direct response about what we heard from potentially President Trump. And then I will move into our own constructive to add on to what we've heard from Dr. Gibson today. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is some of the critiques that have been made about the rotating internship. First of all, the addition of time, and second of all, a disruption to a system that we've crafted now. So first on this concept of the addition of time. This is an important concern because the time of students and educators and those who make the system run is immensely valuable, and we want doctors to get to work. But, moreover, Dr. Gibson and I want these doctors to be happy and settled, and we believe that there are other structural ways to solve the problems of it taking too long to become a doctor. And note that these problems will still exist whether or not the rotating internship occurs. Things like earlier entry programs, things like earlier streaming, things like competency-based programs, all things I would note that Queen's is taking a forward lead on, recognizing that these can help solve those problems instead. This actually allows us to deal with the root issues and saves time in the long run, and the difficulty of switching between residencies and specialties is something I'm going to talk about later in my speech. The second thing I briefly want to touch on is the concept of the disruption to the system, which is also an important concern because we do need to recognize the time and effort that has been put into making the current system a good one. But it was phased out almost 25 years ago. I was barely alive, so I think that we're well within our mandate to reassess the needs of students and the system every quarter of a century or so. And there's many possibilities of how we could be allowed to do that, and I think in the long time it would save us from a lot of harms. So some direct refutation to what we heard. About this concept of a victory lap as procrastination, I would say that a late decision does not equal a poor one, and in fact actually can equal better ones, and that we all make decisions differently and at different rates, and we ought not punish people who make slower decisions or take more time to make those decisions. Secondly, though, about this concept of a fixed menu, I don't know how we know what we like until we get to try little bits of everything. And even if it is a bit of a bigger cost, I think it's far much better you pay that cost up front than order the whole roast duck and not touch a bite of it and not be able to return it at the end of your meal. But also in terms of speed dating and the process of decisions, I think you don't know what your subconscious is leading to until you have the opportunity to experience it. I might know on the surface that I like using my hands and I like meeting people, and maybe that equation adds up to one kind of specialty. But until I have the opportunity to experience what that is like in the role and meet the people and do the job, that's when my subconscious that they would prefer to use can actually draw upon and tell me to do something. So those are the benefits of the rotating internship there. So I'm going to talk about a few things today. Mainly I'm going to speak about being a student, because after about 56 days in medical school, that's just about all I'm qualified to talk about. So first of all, I want to talk about two things: what you want to do, and secondly, about transitions. And in each of those, I'm going to touch on two things that are really important to students, that being education and also the growth of self. But before that, the premise here is that it's very difficult to change fields once you've made your decision. So in Wellness Week, Dr. Susan Edwards, Director of the Office of Resident Wellness in the Postgraduate Medical Education Office at the University of Toronto, spoke to us about burnout, and she mentioned the biggest stress that she helps residents work through is the concept that they've picked the wrong choice and they don't know how to get out of it. And she said it's an awful feeling because they want them to help get out and get into a better specialty, and everybody wants that, but there's no capacity built into the system to deal with that. And changing the system to allow that capacity and transition would be far harder than adding a year beforehand where that increased flexibility exists. And so I think that that is something we want to give residents, and in some ways I think we owe it to our students to allow them to make an informed choice. So first of all, how do you know what you want to do? So as a student self, an informal survey of students in 2013 at QMed, by second year only 13 people knew what they wanted to do. That meant 77 students had some idea or no idea at all what they wanted to do. And this is complicated by an ever-growing number of career options and specializations and routes. There are 30 postgraduate training program options, which will further differentiate into 70 approved medical specialty certifications. So how do we try and know what we want to do? We try observerships, we take personality quizzes, we reflect, which are all amazing skills that are built into the system, but sometimes it isn't enough. Why isn't it enough? 4 reasons. 1, we ourselves don't know. We are growing and we are changing within medical school, and that's something that's good. We want students to learn about themselves, and we want the flexibility for their personalities to change and for them to challenge themselves. 2, we learn through exposure. That's why we don't only get lectures anymore. We go and we have clinical skills and we have observerships and we're exposed to things. 3, you can still have a fear of doubt about making the wrong choice without all the information, because 4, at Queen's you can't actually do all the core rotations before CARMS is due. Because of the lack of capacity and not being able to have both sets of clerks in the hospital at the same time, you could do everything right only to discover what you want to do arguably too late. And even if it's not too late, there's still a lot of fear and stress which serves nobody any good. So I think the impact to that is if you want to lower stress, this is something that you should be in favor of. So secondly, about education and what you want to know. I think the counterfactual then about making this decision is to push it upstream and not the kind of upstream population global health thinking that we want. Here, this actually shifts the focus from learning in your undergrad to making a premature career selection. And it's already a stress that we feel in terms of having to associate ourselves with one interest group or another, or how can I do all those things, and what kind of resume should I be building for myself? And our associate dean would actually agree, based off of a blog post that he wrote for us, about the challenge of career selection, where he said, quote, "The subversion of medical education. Medical school curricula are increasingly directed towards career exploration, to the extent that both core content and electives are essentially devoted to this purpose. Career exploration is, in essence, subverting the educational priority. Rotating internships could solve this problem prior to the completion of your undergrad." So secondly, briefly about transitions, and under the education aspect of this. I think this allows you to segment education versus your career and residency, and it allows better leverage between the design and outcomes of both your undergrad and your residency programs. What kind of outcomes could you have with this program? Respect for other disciplines by knowing what they are, how they live, and why they are important to you, even if you do not use that discipline. How to refer your patients to other specialists. Knowledge of populations, who we're going to serve, who are going to the people that we have to know how to communicate with. The knowledge of connections to other interprofessionals beyond doctors, the nurses and therapists and nutritionists and pharmacists and lab scientists that make the system run. These are all people we want to know and respect and know how to communicate with. And even for those who do know what they want to do, who might see this as a waste of time, the art of medicine, not just the practice of it, is learned through histories and physicals, the principles and practice of clinical skills in action, one might say, which is where we learn how these lectures apply. And we would far prefer students who know the whole and can progress towards holistic models of health for their students, for their patients, which is something that we've seen a lot of desire for patients to have. So secondly, under this point of transitions about the student self, I would love a year for you, for all of you, to understand yourself and how you could fit into this amazing system that you've devoted 4 years of intense training to and will commit most of your adult life to. It's an opportunity to see a new environment and a new context, to go to a different part of the country, to train with a different group of people, and to feel attached to it for a year and have the confidence in knowing that this is your place and this is for you to learn who you are in the system. And in fact, narrowing into that, perhaps picking 2 or 3 specialties that you simply can't make up your mind about, but having the opportunity to rotate between those allows deeper exploration between them. What does life actually look like for these doctors? These are something that we can ask doctors and ask, what does your call schedule look like? What does your work-life balance look like? But it's very hard to apply those kinds of concepts that we're told until we can live them and experience ourselves. And it's not something we can just experience from a cumulative 80 hours of discontinuous observership and somehow add that all together and say, this is what my life will look like. That's the value of this year specifically. So what personal skills might we gain from this transition? Firstly, collaboration between others in your year, where you work with other interns for a full year and get to know them and learn and work and support each other. Secondly, confidence, practicing skills, rotating as a clerk, managing the same problems but at a higher level of expertise and responsibility. Resilience, a year to undergo the changes with graduated stakes. And independence, graduated responsibilities such that the fear of simply entering residency might decrease. So in conclusion, competence is not just a checklist of skills. Can you intubate? Can you resuscitate? It's awareness of when these skills are needed and their impact. Awareness comes from experience. We would allow for a transition between foundational education and a commitment to discipline that would consolidate core competencies, establish collaboration, confidence, resilience, and interdependence. We want happy doctors who take their time to decide and are confident in their choices. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Mazzetti. When first tasked with debating the merits of the rotating internship, I thought to myself, what's a rotating internship? And as a young medical student, I had never heard of such a thing. And like Galen, miasma theory, and the concept of the 4 humors, there was good reason why I hadn't. An avid historian himself, I'm sure Dr. Travill would be pleased to find that we're having an historical debate tonight. If the preceding speakers haven't already made it clear, what we're talking about here is another year spent wandering aimlessly through the wards. Really, what we're talking about is another year of clerkship. No doubt, the current system is not without its stresses and flaws. But what our opponents are proposing as a solution, as a cure to what ails us as medical students, is the proliferation of undifferentiated bodies, which in most medical circles is a cancer. If you get the diagnosis wrong, your treatment is doomed to fail. But of course, the reverse is also true. When your treatment shows no obvious benefits, it's time to reconsider your diagnosis. For the sake of simplicity, I've organized the rest of my speech into 3 sections. I will now discuss argument number 1, which is entitled History, or Hindsight is 20/20, except apparently sometimes 20/20 can mean willfully blind. Sorry, that's harsh. So, Yogi Berra probably once said, "The way forward isn't backward." And if he didn't, he should have. It would have been very convenient. The rotating internship was introduced in 1951, a time when there were only around 14 specialties. And of the 6 years of training out of high school, only 1 was spent in hospital. Likewise, learning was primarily book-based. It is therefore understandable how, under these circumstances, an additional year spent on the wards would benefit a young medical student, if only to make them more competent physicians, or, given their age, to at least let them finish puberty. Training was hospital-based, and standards were set by each institution individually. There was little, if any, national regulation. Thus, the quality of training, and thereby, one could argue, the quality of physician, varied widely. And to be sure, as has already been mentioned, after that 1-year internship, you were certified to practice. You could hang up your shingle and call yourself a general practitioner. Which brings me to my second point. You probably shouldn't touch that. In my undergraduate years, I took a handful of courses in psychology. It will come as a surprise only to the proponents of the rotating internship that despite dabbling here and there, I'm not actually qualified to practice as a psychologist. To be honest, it's been a few years since then, but I don't really remember much of it, and I think I would probably do more harm than good, and I think psychologists would be rightly offended by any suggestion otherwise. In 1993, when the rotating internship was abolished, it was in large part because of concerns over the quality of primary care in Canada. And herein lies a central flaw in the argument to bring back the rotating internship. Family medicine is a specialty in its own right, not something you can simply fall back on when you don't get a job in your chosen specialty. Like the anti-vaxxer inherits a world largely free of measles, mumps, and rubella, and so becomes ignorant to the benefits of vaccines, so too are opponents, blind to the benefits of a post-rotating internship Canada. So let us not so casually eschew the wisdom of our predecessors. Let us not forget that there was good reason to get rid of the rotating internship. Dr. Holland once said, Einstein once said, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. You know it. Argument number 3, entitled, It's Not That Hard. It stands to reason that habits are shaped according to external expectations. Thus, it is important to consider what sort of habits a rotating internship might encourage. While the prospect of choosing what you want to do with the rest of your life is certainly daunting, making difficult decisions is something medical students are trained to do and will be expected to do for the rest of their lives. So then, why a double standard for their own lives? There's a reason the CanMed's competency is leader and not wanderer. Experiences over a lifetime accumulate such that a person comes to know what they like and don't like, what works for them and what doesn't. Eventually, this forms a framework for expeditious decision-making. As an example, in my early teens, I took a job at Boston Pizza. I worked there for 4 hours and quit. That was enough. And let me tell you, I did not need to rotate through Little Caesars, Papa John's, and Domino's to figure out that I didn't want to spend my days slinging pizzas. And the fast food analogy is a good one. After all, indecision is a natural consequence of having a lot of choices, not a disease to be cured. Sure, you might be undecided, but so too, it seems, are half the people in front of me in line at McDonald's. And I don't see my opponents advocating mandatory queue times at fast food restaurants. We know the truth is, most people are usually just happy to eat. As I mentioned earlier, there were only 14 specialties when the rotating internship was first introduced. There are now 84 specialties and subspecialties, according to the Royal College. So what limits exactly do my opponents propose for the scope of our exposure? By my math, a minimum of 2 weeks in 84 specialties works out to 42 months, a period of time traditionally reserved for prison sentences, not internships. So is the solution then to see a bit of everything? Of course not. Ain't nobody got time for that. But hopefully this will have illustrated just how arbitrary it is to give 1 extra year to expand your clinical exposure. If at the end of your undergraduate medical education you are truly undecided, despite 2 years of pre-clerkship, 15 months of pre-CARMS clerkship, and countless observerships, you will be happy to know that your options are many. Internal medicine provides 3 years to decide on a subspecialty. Family medicine residents can choose from as many as 18+1 programs to customize their education. And if you find yourself in another specialty, well, you can always subspecialize. If at the end of all of this, you are truly at the end of your rope, it is still possible to start fresh in a new program. Under these circumstances, the rotating internship is all but obsolete. Through all this, what is perhaps most important is what the students want. A survey conducted by Boulay et al. Found that 99% of Queen's medical students were opposed to the reinstatement of the rotating internship. And as for that last 1%, to be fair, I'm not sure Gray entirely understood the question. As a final thought, I want to share with you something I overheard recently that I think really speaks to the core of this issue. Some of you will know that I live in close proximity to Kingston's one and only strip club, the Plaza. Walking back late from an evening studying at NMB, I noticed 2 men smoking and talking loudly outside the gentlemen's club. As I neared my apartment, it became apparent that they were talking about one of the dancers inside. Taking a drag from his cigarette, one turned to the other and said, "Bruh." She always winks at me and touches my thigh. There's no way she's not into me. I just think I need to give her more time to figure it out. When your treatment isn't working, it's time to reconsider your diagnosis. The governing bodies that abolished the rotating internship obviously deemed it an inadequate treatment, and if anything, it makes even less sense today than it did then. Besides, decision-making isn't nearly as complicated as our opponents have made it sound. Whatever it is they are trying to treat isn't going to be made better by a rotating internship.
Fascinating listening about bars in Kingston, fast food places, and the Plaza Hotel. I'm glad we work on cultural competence for students who come to Kingston in this esteemed debate. I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised, based on the hair that came in today, that there are some challenges with listening, which I say to my 8-year-old. But I will, and to be fair, perhaps they couldn't hear me. But we'll revisit just a few core concepts that we think are important. The first is that just because something wasn't good back in 1988 doesn't mean we can't make it better today. There are many things. Again, there are bad comebacks. We freely admit that. Greece too. Don't go there. But there are good comebacks as well, and we have learned a lot. Essentially, what Dr. Holland described in the vascular surgery situation, that is bad Elvis. we don't want to go back to bad Elvis. We want to go back to good Elvis, and we want to learn from what we have learned for many years in terms of competency-based. I'm sure that we have the ability to design a better internship year than what was available before. But mostly, we want to enhance the learning for our students. If students are less focused on what career they have to pick from day one, as is well documented in many studies, then we would like to think that they are able to learn the skills of medicine. It's not just about everything you look up on Wikipedia. It's the skills and the history and physical side of things, and the clinical reasoning and the art of medicine. And that is what you learn by a spiral curriculum and coming back over and over again. We would argue that this is not speed dating. It might be, dare I suggest, a second date. One where you actually speak to one another, as opposed to simply checking out what you're wearing. So overall, we would like to bring back a better, improved rotating internship. I feel that we have the skills. My esteemed colleague did a great job of advocating from the student perspective. I ask you to consider that. Thank you.
When I was young, I read a book entitled The Third Wave, written by Alvin Toffler, who passed away fairly recently. He described a future world beyond the first and second waves of the agriculture and industrial revolutions. Civilization is now on the brink of that third wave, and so is medicine. William Osler, the father of residency training, said, "There are in truth no specialties in medicine, since to know fully the most important diseases, a man must be familiar with their manifestations in many organs." But with apologies to Osler, perhaps the debate is not over the value of a broad education, but rather how it is delivered. A third wave is upon us, a third wave based not only on patient-centered care, but also learner-centered education. We said earlier that the wrong diagnosis would lead to the wrong treatment. Reinstating the rotating internship is not the right treatment. In fact, reinstating the rotating internship is not a treatment at all. It is a symptom of a rigid and inflexible education system in need of reform. You offer the rotating internship to students so that they can better accommodate the game. But it is the game which should accommodate the student. We hear the loud cry, the rotating internship promises to make America great again. But beware the charlatan. More time, more exposure, more breadth of experience, more rotations, more rigidity, more walls. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, wasn't that fabulous? That was, yeah. Thank you, Michelle and Julia and Max and David. It was truly a night to remember. We appreciate it, and I think the resounding applause says that that both sides did such a fantastic job. But as promised, remembering where you were on that pendulum, I would ask now how many of you, with a show of hands, support the resolution that the rotating internship should be reinstated? And how many of you believe that it should not be reinstated? Okay, well, we've had a wonderful show of hands. and thank you so much. A special shout out again to Chris Frank. And once again, perhaps we could end with a round of applause for our four fabulous debaters.